meditation. And really, but you don't see cats like sit down and bury their poop in the sand and then go over and write an ode to the poop that I just buried in the sand. That's not really what it does. There's certainly an odor, but there's no ode to the sand. They don't do those kind of things. They don't think about the highest realities, truth, goodness, and beauty. But that's exactly what we humans do. We look for the truest and deepest nature of things. It goes beyond the sensible. It goes beyond the imagination. It goes beyond what we can touch and see and feel. And it goes to something that we would call spiritual and material. And that is a part of our soul, that is a part of our body as well, or our natures as well. We have an immaterial aspect, an intelligent aspect. And so if that's the case, then when we are considering what's the best for us, we have to consider, most highly of all, because it's the highest faculty we have to consider our intellect and our will, the spiritual side of things. And those spiritual goods are actually served by the physical goods. If you were starving and fighting a tiger, how many of you would be contemplating, is essence the same as existence? Do I really have hands? What is tiger? Why does tiger bite head? I mean, your grammar will start falling apart fairly quickly when you're fighting a tiger. Trust me, I've been there. Don't recommend it. I had a life as a circus clown for a while. There's actually an element of truth to that. Talk to me later. Why am I this way? It's okay. God loves me. And so, if our bodily needs aren't taken care of, the final end of the human being, we can't sit down and contemplate the highest truths. We can't stop and think about our moral decisions and really wonder what is tiger, what is tree, what is me. We can't do those things, and that is a much better life than somebody who's just living in a subsistent way. They're able to eat and they can maybe reproduce every once in a while, or they're slightly sheltered by a tree branch that fell on top of them while they're trying to sleep under the tree, or whatever. That's not a terribly good life. That at best is a life suited for a really sad pig. Okay, that's not a great life for a pig. A human life, a fully authentic human life, is one which enables us to exercise and rest in our capacity to know and to love, most especially our intellectual ability and our ability to will and desire. And it's also one that is directed by reason. And what do I mean by that? And so let's go back to this eating example. So let's say I eat. I have this food in front of me, and I eat my chunk of lasagna that big, my salad, and my brownie. I think I had a brownie today. So I eat that. I'm good. I'm feeling full. And I look over there and I see there's a whole pan of lasagna left. Lasagna is tasty. So good. And so I go over there and I start shoveling it in my mouth. And I just continually get more and gorge. To the point where, in the old Roman days, I'm just I want more lasagna. So I'm going to spit it all up, throw it out, and say okay, more lasagna. Come on, give this to me. Is that going to be good for me? No, absolutely not. That's a terrible idea. Don't overeat. That's called gluttony. And then the second half of that is, and people do struggle with this, and so I'm not making light of it. But that's bulimia. That's eating sometimes for the sake of pleasure, or even sometimes for the sake of show. Just act like you're eating, but then throwing it up. That's not good for your body. And if you're struggling with that, please talk to somebody who can help you through that. It's not something to be necessarily ashamed of. It's a struggle that you're going through, and so please make sure you tell people. Kind of like how in my story a little bit earlier, I didn't tell my mom and dad about getting beat up on my 10th birthday party because I was embarrassed about it. But you know what? My life probably would have been a lot better if I had done that. So if you're struggling with something like that, please tell your parents. They're not gonna be mad. They're not gonna hate you. They're just gonna want the best for you, because that's what love is. Like Scott was saying, love is desiring and acting towards the good of the beloved. And so when we eat, if I'm throwing up or if I'm being gluttonous, then what happens there is I'm acting not in just a way that's other than the end of eating, which is for food and for pleasure, but what I'm doing is I'm acting contrary to it, right? Okay, and so that's an important point. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. And so when it comes to being a human, we need to eat in accordance with reason. We know how much food we ought to eat, or at least sometimes we do. Sometimes it's very difficult. So what are we? What is the nature, what could we call a human? Aristotle will call a human a rational animal. I'm going to throw one in there just to make it clear. It's contained within rational, but we are a rational social animal. And so we're intellectual beings with bodies, but we also have these interactions, these kind of relationships, right? We speak to one another, we have conversations, we get to know one another, and all this is very true, and that's what it is to be us. And so since we have to interact with others, what we need to do is we need to act in a proper accordance, right? It's not right for me just to come up and smack Wab in the face, right? Wab is right here. His name's Jonathan, but His name's Waba. Say hello. Hi, Waba. It's not good for me to do that because it disrupts the social order. It disrupts a part of my nature. It disrupts a part of his nature and acts contrary to the way I ought to behave. But there's certain ways that I should behave, right? Like if I, like being cowardly, if I am so afraid of stepping out my bedroom door that I just like curl up in the bed all day and cry, that's not a good thing for me. It's not reasonable for me to do that. If I think that stuffing myself and exploding my stomach is like the good for me, I might be misunderstanding the good for my own body. I, as a human, need to operate and need to act in my nature according to the truth about myself. And the thing is, how many of you guys have created yourselves? Jake. Great. I guess we'll be talking about some principles of causality a little later. It's impossible for anything to create itself because in order to do that, it would have to exist before it existed, which is ridiculous and a little bit confusing to even think about. And so we have this nature that we do not determine. We don't make ourselves. We don't make the world around us. We have accepted and we found it. And now every faculty that the human person has, and the whole human person itself, does have a particular end. Eating is for the sake of nourishing the body. The body as a whole and all of its other faculties are to help the highest part of the body, or part of the person, the mind, the soul, to come to its highest good, knowing the truth and being virtuous. And that's a big thing too, is being able to know how to act in accordance with reason. And we are all striving to that. All of us want to be good, virtuous people, right? Does anybody here want to be like some vicious monster? I didn't think so. Nobody ever wants that. It's practically impossible for us to desire evil for the sake of itself. And so when we make a moral decision, when we think about what we need to do, remember the first principle is what? Do the good, avoid the evil. We need to do the good, but what kind of good? Just what feels good? No. Very often not. Has anybody here ever like snapped at somebody that you didn't need to, and you enjoyed it? A lot. Did you need to snap at them? No. And here's the crazy thing. Not only were you acting contrary to reason in terms of the decision you made, but it's contrary to reason for you to have certain feelings. Wow. What does he mean by that? My feelings can be wrong? Yes, they absolutely can be. They can be misdirected. They can be improperly proportioned. For instance, if Waba bumps into me on the subway, I don't know why I'm picking on Waba here today. Partly because he's right there. If he bumps into me on the subway because he was texting or whatever, it's not okay for me to pick him up and throw him Superman over the subway. I don't know where are there subways in Minnesota even? I don't know. But regardless, I shouldn't throw him into an oncoming subway train. That's a bad thing. That's way overreaction. The feelings that I have there of anger for him accidentally bumping into me are really disproportionate. Or if he trips me and then I get really mad at John Paul over here, guess what? It's wrongly directed. And so our feelings and our desires can be directed towards the wrong thing. Shocking. And that is even good things too, like love. For instance, if we devote our lives to material goods and we love them above all things, you know what? We've misdirected our love. You don't love objects, you use them. You love people. And when you put objects ahead of people, you are distorting your nature. And you're lowering the good and the dignity, and you're denying the dignity of the person you're supposed to love by putting them beneath objects. And so what does this have to do? Well, again, we make decisions for the good, away from the evil, based on our nature. We didn't create our nature, and sometimes our feelings can even be misdirected. But the important thing is not necessarily our feelings, but to act rightly in accordance with reason. And so, with that in mind, what is marriage? I think that we can come to a fairly reasonable starting point by saying it's a relationship. Okay, great. Good place to start. But what kind of relationship? Are my brother and I married? No. I mean, we're not married. We're married. We're not married to each other. So, I mean, that's what I mean. Am I married with my mom because we have a good relationship? No, of course not. Well, then, what kind of relationship does it be? Does it need to be loving and committed? Well, I'm very committed to my friend Waba and my friend Jake back there. Does that mean I'm married to them? No. In fact, they would be very adamantly opposed to that. To spend more time with me? That's insane. Why would he want to do that? And so it's not just a committed and loving relationship, because then we're speaking in too broad of categories. And so we reduce it down a little bit. Well, what we can say, I think, fairly easily is that all marriages are not only loving and committed in relationships, because if you have love and commitment, either implies a relationship. They also have a sexual component to it, right? Yeah, marriages have a sexual component. Great, let's start there. So if the nature of marriage is a loving, committed relationship with a sexual component, we've gotten to the last part. What is the nature of sex? I think this is actually a fairly easy thing to answer. I want you all to examine your own bodies. And then, hold on. I didn't mean that. Hold on. Wow. Can we erase that part? Let's start over. Cool. I want you all to think about your own bodies. There we go. Okay, we're editing that part. Fantastic. Think about your own bodies. Your lungs generally work within your own body, right? Yeah, unless there's some sort of terrible defect where you need an iron lung or something. Your heart, it does its thing. It circulates the blood. Your immune system works entirely within yourself to attack foreign invaders and everything. Your digestive system, you put food in, food comes out, and that's great. It works within itself. However, there's one function, one system in your body that literally does not make any sense at all in light of itself. It only makes sense in light of something else. So in the case of a man, it only makes sense in light of a woman, vice versa. It's obvious that these two things, these two parts of our body, are made to work for each other. In fact, even the whole process of beginning a sexual encounter and everything, all of it is oriented towards the opposite sex. I'm not going to get into nitty-gritty details here, but if we look at the nature of sex, if we were just aliens, it's zipped us and came down and looked at humans on Earth, what will be the very first thing, and we can look at other animals too, the very first thing that sex is for? Reproduction. Babies. Sex makes babies. FYI, that happens. It always shocks me. People are I'm so surprised. Well, did you have sex? Yes. Well, then, the test towards babies, okay? You didn't pass 6th grade anatomy or 6th grade biology. It's sad. So sex has its first purpose and its primary purpose, reproduction. But what else is the reality of sex? Kind of like eating. It's pleasurable, all right? Yeah, it feels great. It feels good. It's good. It's a good thing, and that's not a bad thing that it feels good. In fact, that's a part of the reason why it feels good in the first place is that so that we as organisms continue to propagate the species, right? That's a great thing. That helps us as a species survive. And beyond that, even the act of sex itself is very good for a relationship. There's a chemical called oxytocin that's released when you have a lot of skin-to-skin contact and you engage in the sexual act and everything, that creates a really strong bond between people, and it can help deepen a relationship. And so it's oriented towards, first of all, procreation, but also unity. And within that unity, you have things like consent and pleasure and all that jazz. And so the two natural ends of sex are unity and procreation. And unity, and that's what everything else is oriented towards. So pleasure is to help us be more united. I mean, if sex is supposed to be an expression of love, and it wasn't pleasurable at all, you might as well just say, hey, I love you, pinch my elbow. It's very strange. And so even the pleasure itself is oriented towards the unitive aspect of sex. But what kind of things are we? So we're not just like other animals where we can just make a baby and then have 87 of them and then walk away, right? Because what kind of animals are we? We're not just brute animals, we're rational and social animals. All right. So when we engage in a sexual act, what happens is that we're not creating just any animal whatsoever. We're creating rational animals. And so since that's the case, we have an obligation to make sure that we educate these little rational animals. Which most people don't really reach rationality until they're 25 years old or older. So, in fact, I don't even think I've gotten there yet. Just kidding, of course. By the very nature of being human, you're rational even if you don't exhibit it. Don't worry about that right now. We'll talk later. But we're also social animals. So not only do we need to learn things about the world, we also need to learn how to interact and socialize. And so with that in mind, if we are engaging in a sexual act which is oriented towards the production of rational social animals, it is for the sake of the common good. And so in order for a sexual act to be 100% licit, it needs to not only be, it needs not only to be be open to life, to be open to the unitive aspect of sex, and it also needs to be something that's committed both to the spouse because of that psychological and spiritual bond that you share when you do have sex, but it also needs to be committed to the child and its upbringing for its whole life. And so with all that in mind, we have to understand that these things altogether require, because it's for the sake of the common good and the social order, a public commitment, right? Because if we are here as humans trying to make some more baby humans, and this is for the sake of the culture, we need to show up, we need to show up in front of everybody. We are committed to each other because we're committed to you as well. Everybody's marriage is oriented towards others. It's oriented towards the whole. And so if we don't make some sort of public proclamation of that, if we don't make a commitment like that, then we're not quite getting at the real ends of sex. Now, of course, if it's not the case that you can do that, even still, I mean, like a deacon and 2 witnesses and the people, like that's not a big public commitment, but it's still showing that that you're oriented towards the public good. And so with that in mind, all of these things tell us that marriage, from the very nature of what the word means, relationship of loving trust and compassion, that has sexual nature, which means that it's open to unity and open to procreation, and that needs to be lifelong, is something that we can define in that way very specifically. And we can come to know that very well. And now I'm going to wrap up here, and just one thing I want to say here. What does the Catholic Church want to do with homosexuals? I want to read something right out of the Catechism. People don't hear about this, and people often think that the Catholic Church hates gay people or hates, because I know this is something that all of you are thinking about right now. And so this is what the Church says. This is Catechism of the Catholic Church 2358 through 2359. Sorry. The number of men and women who have deep-seated homosexual tendencies is not negligible. This inclination, which is objectively disordered, remember we talked about how if our desires are oriented wrongly, they can either be like disproportionate or towards the wrong end. That's what I mean by disordered, not like it's a mental disorder. This, which is objectively disordered, constitutes for most of them a trial. They must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity, and every sign of unjust discrimination in their regard should be avoided. These persons are called to fulfill God's will in their lives, and if they are Christians, to unite the sacrifice of the Lord's cross, the difficulties they may encounter from their conditions. Homosexual persons are called to chastity by the virtues of self-mastery that teach them inner freedom, at all times by the support of disinterested friendship, by prayer and sacramental grace. They can and should gradually and resolutely approach Christian perfection. Now I want you guys to note something. The word tolerance did not show up in that paragraph once. And there's a reason for that. Because tolerance is about 2 things. It's about them, the other, and it's about tolerating a bad thing. Nobody tolerates a sunny day. We tolerate the rain. So when we are talking about our brothers and sisters in Adam who have these homosexual tendencies, and I think it's absurd to say that your experience, number one, is your identity. I mean, I have a lot of brokenness in my own life, and I've had that experience. Does that mean I am fundamentally broken? No, that doesn't mean that. I'm creating the image and likeness of God, and He loves me. And that's where I need to find my identity. So when we talk about tolerance, I don't think that's the right way to talk about this. We shouldn't tolerate gay people, homosexuals. Scandalous, I know. Hold on a second. I promise you. We don't accept them in that sense, where it's like, yeah, sure, you're fine, you're in. Why? Because they belong. Every single person who has any struggle with sin, who has any difficulty, who has any tendency towards something which is objectively disordered in its nature, they are just like any of us. If you look at the Catechism here, there's nothing in there that's special to homosexual people, people with homosexual attractions. We're all called to chastity. We're all called to self-mastery. We're all called to virtue. And we're all called to be saints. In 1 Thessalonians 4:3 it says, "This is the will of God for your life." Holiness. Every single one of you is called for that. And so when we think about these kind of things, one thing that I want to see so badly is the church to canonize the first openly gay saint. Somebody who says, yes, this is something I struggle with, but because I know the way God made me, I know the good for my own nature, I know the good, and I want to live that good in my own life, there's somebody who through self-sacrifice overcame that and united their sufferings to Christ and becomes a hope of inspiration for others. And if I know that there's people in here who might be struggling with this kind of identity, know that, again, this isn't your identity. It's not. Your identity is somebody who is created in the image and likeness of God, who is of unsurpassable worth and love. And what I want to say here is exactly what John Paul II says. Remember that you are not the sum of your weaknesses, your failures, or your sins. Your experience is not your identity. You are rather the sum of your Father's love and your capacity to live the love of Jesus Christ in the world. You do not need to change your experience. You do not need to change your feelings or your identity in order to become Catholic and enter into a strong and powerful relationship with God. He accepts you exactly as you are. But just like everyone else, He loves you too much to leave you that way. Because God not only wants us to fulfill our own natures in the natural end, He Himself came down and became man so that we can become like God. God wants to call us up into His own relationship within the Trinity so that we become partakers in the divine nature. God wants to give us a happiness that is beyond our comprehension. And there's nothing you can do to change yourself, nothing you can do that will make God desire anything but the highest happiness you can possibly attain, and even more. Thank you.